Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about the top 10 worst summonable Sparkings in the history of Dragon Ball Legends. But before we jump into the list itself, I do just want to clarify some of the criteria that I'm using to come up with the rankings of this list. So number one, these rankings will be based on the character's performance in the meta environments in which they initially released in. So if a character at some point after they released got a Zenkai Awakening or unique equipment, that would not be taken into consideration for placement on this list. I am just purely looking at how each character performed during the time in which they were added to the game. Number two, I am strictly going to be evaluating characters based on their performance in battle, and I will not be taking into account bench potential for any of these rankings. And lastly, number three, this is probably the most important point. This game has been out for 6.5 years, and I really did my best to remember to the best of my ability how all characters performed when they were new. But when you're talking about literally hundreds of characters and 6.5 years of content, it's just, very hard to remember everything. So there may be instances where some characters might deserve to be on here, and I may have simply just overlooked them or forgotten to include them in some regard. However, I did start off with a massive list of like 30 candidates, and I did narrow it down to 10 for this list. But I'll publish all the characters that didn't quite make the final cut at the end of the video as just its own separate list. And yes, I did go back to look at each individual candidate to refresh myself on how they did on release to determine if they, warranted a spot on this list or not. So I really have spent a considerable amount of time on this video. I've done my research. I've refreshed myself on how each character performed on release. So I feel pretty good about this list, but I think this is definitely going to be something where if you asked 100 day one players who still play the game right now to sit down and make their top 10 worst Sparkings on release ever list, I highly doubt you would get 2 players that come up with the exact same rankings. It is just very dependent upon individual experience with all these characters throughout all 6.5 years of this game being out, which is very, very hard to get 2 people with the exact same opinions. But anyway, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into the list. And of course, we'll start off with number 10, and we'll make our way up from there. So number 10 on our list of worst summonable Sparkings on release is going to be Super Saiyan 2 Vegeta from Battle of Gods, aka Rage Vegeta, as people would call him. So the first thing I want to do with this guy is just take a look at what he's doing. This is a character that came out back in March of 2019. So we're talking about almost a full year from the game launching. This is not like, he's coming out in the first 6 months of the game being out. This is like, the game came out at the end of May/early June of 2018. So we're really talking about like 8-9 months after the game already launched, which is a considerable amount of time. But take a look at this. This guy is essentially doing nothing with his first unique ability if you have a full team alive, which you guys know how the game works. I mean, to be fair, the game worked a lot differently back when this guy released as it does now, so it's very hard to compare the two environments of the game. But most of the game, especially back then when you didn't do all this damage we're doing right now, a lot of it was just due to the fact of how the level cap was there. There weren't the star system was different. The actual battle system was almost completely different. The game was just nothing like it is right now. You didn't really have instances where you were just one-shotting characters. And so what that ended up meaning for you is for most of the match, you would still have a full team alive, which means this Vegeta was essentially getting nothing from this first unique ability here. And then the second one was 20% damage inflicted to tag Saiyan or Hybrid Saiyan for 20 counts when this character is switched to standby. So we had some support, which, is some redeeming quality here. But again, we're not talking about, this is not a character that released on launch of the game. This is a character that launched like 9 months into the game. So it's very tough to think of a situation where this guy's going to be like super impactful. Remember, Purple Transforming Dragon Ball Super Broly came out essentially a full 4 months before this guy, back in December of 2018. Same color, and he's also a Saiyan, which essentially was the main team people were using then. I would say this guy probably got to be about as good as the rest of the game once he got to be the last man standing character. Like, once you got him to be the final character alive, at that point, he was about as good as, like, a good character. He wasn't soloing teams as last man standing, he was probably just as good as like Purple Broly, maybe not even as good as Purple Broly, but he was as good as like some of the other, you know, better characters in the game, like maybe like Yellow Goku Black or something like that back then, as the last man standing, which, you know, so why would you sacrifice other units before him? Typically, you're running characters like Purple Broly, Red Super Saiyan 3 Goku, Purple Super Saiyan 3 Goku, Red Free Broly. A lot of times you would try and make these color counter setups back then. Purple, red, yellow, blue, stuff like that. And so there's really no point for you to ever sack this character, or sorry, sack other characters before this guy off to go for this, because this guy was just straight up worse than those other units. So just a very flawed character. In fact, I think this is actually the final character that they offered for direct purchase in the Real Money shop. They used to actually do this back when the first, I believe it's like 9-ish months of the Ultra Space Time summon banners were the main summon format of the game. They would actually offer you one of those characters as a direct purchase in the shop. So you could actually purchase this character directly from the Real Money shop without having to actually summon for him. And I believe this was actually the final character that they offered that for. So we're going to have Super Saiyan 2 Purple Vegeta, aka Rage Vegeta, at number 10 on this list. Move on to number 9 next. So coming in at number 9 on the list is going to be Blue Krillin. This guy came out in August 2018, when the only teams essentially that existed were Saiyans and androids. You kind of had a little bit of Frieza Force in there too. You had the one banner with Final Form Frieza and Ginyu. Then you had some EXs in there as well, but essentially Saiyans and androids were the two teams to look out for. Movies just simply wasn't good enough at the time. So basically what ended up happening is this guy was essentially just homeless immediately. But that's not really too rare for a lot of super early character releases like this. Again, the game came out in like early June 2018. This guy came out in August. So about 2 months after the game released, it was just tough to really find a place for this character. Reasons why I guess you could say he's not higher up on the list, considering the fact that he was homeless almost immediately. He does have some redeeming qualities, so he had access to a really strong equipment, and back in the day this really made a huge difference because we really didn't have great equipment back then. Here's the equipment he had access to. This is actually a Krillin specific piece of equipment. 20% base blast was nuts on a piece of equipment back like right when the game launched. This was insane. 15% special move damage and 10% key recovery were nice, but 20% base blast was crazy. So that really helped this guy do a little bit of extra damage, of course. He had a team heal with his main ability we could take a look at here. He heals the team by 10% and ki by 60 to himself, and then he heals 20% to the whole team, which was pretty valuable back then. Again, you didn't have these fights where characters were one-shotting, you know, the entire enemy team in like one card. You would have slow chip damage on one character, they would switch, you get slow chip damage on then, you have to reset, you have to charge ki, and then you'd sort of just methodically get through the enemy team. So with that being the way the game was ran, a team heal was super valuable. One of the reasons why Green Piccolo was one of the more valuable characters. And then he also did provide damage support to the team with this last unique ability here. 20% of damage inflicted by allies for 20 timer counts when this character switched to standby. But I mean, even with all these things, you know, I wouldn't really call this character anything other than bad. Again, he had no team. He was essentially getting 0 Z abilities unless you were really going all in with the mono blue setup, which again really didn't exist 2 months after the game dropped because you were running Saiyans or androids, because they actually did have functioning synergistic team builds with Z abilities that actually worked with the whole team. This character was actually one of the first units to ever get a balance adjustment because of how bad he was, but even with that, he saw essentially 0 play just because, again, it's mostly just a team issue. He just couldn't fit anywhere. So we're going to have Blue Krillin at number 9. We'll go ahead and jump into number 8. All right, number 8, we are actually going to have the most recent character on the list here, Yellow Saiyan Saga Goku. Definitely a character I think probably more people are going to be familiar with that are watching this video than probably any other character on the list. So this guy released in April 2024, so he did release this year. This guy, I mean, this is just like a representation of the nightmare that we were about to see with how bad this guy was. This guy released in April of 2024 without base card draw speed. Whoever thought of that should be fired immediately. You know, back in 2020, when LF Blue Gogeta released, the first ever Blue Gogeta in the game, in 2020, we were upset that he didn't have card draw speed. That was the main point of criticism people had for Blue Gogeta back when he dropped in 2020. This guy didn't have card draw speed as a summonable character in 2024. Very just unacceptable levels of incompetence with the design choice here. He essentially requires that you have a dead ally to gain buffs that he should have had at the start of the battle anyway. And even with a dead ally, his damage was just okay, and he essentially has 0 forms of disrupt or any form of defensive utility for that matter. I still believe, even 7 months after his release, that the development team actually made a mistake with his kit. I'm actually going to pull this up because it is just so egregious. I think it's the second unique ability here. It is... right. Wait, is it this one? Yeah, it's this one. Yep, right here. The following effects occur when an enemy activates an Ultimate Arts, Awakened Arts, or Rising Rush while this character is on standby. Shortens own sub count by 10. That is literally the exact opposite of what he should do. This is a character that needs a dead ally to function at his full potential. He should, instead of doing what he's doing right now, he should reduce allies sub count by 10 when he's on the battlefield. Right? That would at least allow you to more easily obtain the condition of needing a dead ally. The way it's currently set up is possibly the most counterintuitive ability in the entire game. It almost makes no sense. So they gave him this weird ability too with the strike cards. Like, he has a 5% chance just to faint at all times with strike cards. I feel like they just wanted him to be a roulette character, and they felt that, you know, if you're somebody who's just getting like omega level luck with this character and you're just fainting the opponent nonstop, I guess they didn't want that to feel too oppressive. But then my question would be, why give this to him at all, if that's going to be your philosophy here? So overall, just a horrible character, horrible design, counterintuitive to what he wants to be doing in his own kit. Just a disaster of a release. So this is going to be Yellow Saiyan Saga Goku at number 8. Let's move on to number 7 because I don't want to look at this art anymore. Number 17 is going to be transforming Super Saiyan Vegeta into Super Saiyan Blue Vegeta. This guy released during part 1 of the 4th anniversary in May 2022, and even with the amount of teams he was on, still was one of the worst releases of all time. I'm laughing because this is kind of like one of those meme characters where everybody's expecting this guy to be on the list, and obviously he was going to be on here. So here we go. This guy is one of the few characters that released with a very strict condition to activate his transformation. We can even take a look here where it states this in his abilities. The character's main ability will be sealed from battle start until one of the following conditions is met. Own remaining health is 50% or below after enemy attack is over, or 50 timer counts have elapsed. So the thought process behind this design was, once Vegeta falls below half HP, we could even scroll down here so I can show this, at the bottom here, applies the following effects to enemy if owner health is 50% or below. He reduces ki by 100 and destroys all cards. So the thought process behind this, by the development team supposedly, is this disrupt would activate, and they thought that, you know, this would be enough for the opponent's combo to end to let Vegeta transform. The way it actually worked is the opponent would activate Vegeta's 50% HP disrupt, then they would Rising Rush. They would activate the disrupt, then they would main ability. They would activate the disrupt, then they would switch characters to continue the combo. They would activate the disrupt, and then if they were in the tag, they were switched in with the tag androids, which was, again, like 99% of all matches at the time this guy came out, they would simply tag switch and continue the combo. So letting the opponent dictate when you get to transform with a character at all, it leaves the character just completely unable to transform essentially ever. And this character's Super Saiyan form is just nothing short of a joke. I mean, it is truly horrible. And let's not pretend, let's not pretend his transform state, we can get the art in here because it's such a meme. Let's not pretend that the Super Saiyan Blue form is much better than the Super Saiyan form. To be fair, it certainly is better, right? But he should have been at least twice as good in this form as he was designed initially, just because of how hard it is to get this off. So overall, just a disgraceful design, and this really felt like the beginning of the downfall of the Vegeta clan team, honestly, in a lot of ways. So this is going to be transforming Super Saiyan Vegeta into Blue Vegeta at number 7. We'll move on to the next spot. Okay, so coming in at number 6 is going to be Green Cooler, and coming in at number 5 is going to be Purple Turles. And I'm going to be talking about both of these characters at the same time, and the reason why is because they both released on the same banner. I think this is back in July of 2018, and this was essentially just 1 month after the launch of the game. This, I believe, is actually... These are the 2 earliest characters on this list. So this is, again, just 1 month, basically, after the launch of the game. The game was, again, I mentioned this earlier, but I'll mention it again, certainly much different 6.5 years ago. But that doesn't change the fact of how absolutely terrible both of these characters were on release. To be completely fair to the developers, they were probably still finding their footing as developers of the game since this was so early in the life cycle of the game, and they probably didn't have fully fleshed out philosophies behind how they wanted to design new characters, right? So, what do you want me to say about this, man? There's not really much to harp on with these guys, other than the fact that they just simply did nothing. I mean, they did no damage, they didn't tank, they didn't support, they didn't do anything. So, there was actually no reason to run them on any of the teams that they had, because there were approximately 12 to 15 better choices in the game, which only made this banner even that much more worthless to invest in, right? It was this banner was a Legends Rising banner. It was Cooler, Turles, and then they had the one-handed purple Spirit Bomb Goku, essentially the first iteration of Tree of Might Goku, the purple one. So I actually did a lot of digging just to find evidence of this, because I remember this vaguely from 6.5 years ago when these guys first dropped. But I actually I had to go to Facebook, the Dragon Ball Legends Facebook account, to find this. This is the original announcement of these characters, Legends Rising banner, dropping back on July 18th of 2018. Okay, so July 18th of 2018. Now, let me actually pull up. Give me a second here. I'm going to pull up. This is again, I had to do a lot of digging. I did my homework for this video, man. Let's go ahead, and this might become blank for a second, but let me quickly change this. There we go. This is the first ever character balance change announcement. If you notice the date on here, it is August 3rd, 2018. Okay. August 3rd, 2018. If we scroll down, they give you a listing of the most used and popular Sparking characters. Remember, this is just 2 weeks after the release of Turles and Cooler. Look at this. Rank 14 is Turles. Rank 15 is Cooler. They were the 2 lowest used Sparkings in the season that they dropped. In fact, they were so bad, we saw them buffed 2 weeks after they dropped. Look at this. Sparking Turles, Sparking Cooler. This is 2 weeks. I will reiterate this again. 2 weeks after they dropped, they got emergency buffed, essentially. So for Turles, look at this. New unique ability, Assault, Sustained Damage. They gave him Sustained Damage Cut. That's how big of a buff. Characters didn't just get Sustained Damage Cut, okay? They didn't just get this. They gave him this because of how bad he was. And the way that they did this is they gave him the buff tied to getting a certain soul boosting board unlocked. Back in the very, very early days of the game, it was actually tough to fully soul boost characters because it costs a lot of resources. You got to grind the souls, and it was a lot of zenny, just to get all the soul boosting boards unlocked and filled in. And they would actually give characters buffs for unlocking new rankings for their soul boosting boards. So for when Turles hitting Master, he gets Sustained Damage Cut here. And then they actually just straight up buffed his green card as well. The green card increases Vanishing Gauge Restoration by 50% instead of 30%. For Cooler, he gets Blast Attack up when reaching Master. Just more damage, which again, is pretty, not common to just see straight up damage buffs like this back in the day here. And then a special skill, Destructive Ray, will now destroy 3 arts cards instead of 1 and decrease enemies' arts card drawing speed. This is actually a pretty big deal. I remember this being very annoying after they buffed him, but the 2 lowest used Sparkings during the season that they dropped, immediately getting a buff like this is like unheard of. Like this is actually just insanity of how bad they were on release. Now, the reason why I have Purple Turles a little bit higher up on this list, aka number 5 as opposed to Cooler being number 6, is, it's very hard to differentiate between how bad, one of these guys are to the other one. But the reason why I have Turles at 5 is just because I think Yellow Frieza was a relatively popular character back then. And so Turles would have had a bit of a bigger disadvantage in most matches color-wise than Cooler was, because Cooler being purple, I mean, you saw Scouter Vegeta sometimes, but I think Yellow Final Form Frieza was a bigger problem, just because he had the, I believe, what was it, the, oh no, I think he actually had I think it was anti-Frieza Force, not anti-Saiyans, but I definitely remember, at least in my experience, I fought Yellow Final Form Frieza more than Purple Scouter Vegeta back then, because he was a better unit, newer character. So these are going to be rankings 5 and 6 on the list here. We got Green Cooler at 6 and Purple Turles at 5. Let's move into the top 4. Okay, number 4 is going to be Blue Deborah. Released back in October of 2018, there are almost 0 redeeming qualities for this utter disaster for release. This guy, he dropped with 0 tags and was not added to a tag for over 6 years. He just got his first tag, Weapon Wielder, 6 years later. 6 years took for them to add this guy to a tag. And back in the early days of the game, not having a tag and being relegated to mono blue was essentially a death sentence, especially because instant transmission Super Saiyan Goku and Green Piccolo were pretty all over the place back when this guy first dropped, right? This is kind of prior to Blue 18 dropping, who was one of the characters that vastly helped mono blue, but that was after this guy came out, right? Not to mention, this guy dropped alongside Green Fatboo, who was probably just okay, but essentially was unkillable if you were running a full blue team back then. So mono blue didn't really exist when this guy dropped. I would say the only positive thing that can be said about this character is the fact that he was the first ever unit to hold a green card, right? So if you take a look here, he actually does hold a green card, which means you get an extra green card added to your deck of available cards. Instead of having 1, you have 2, which, it might make it sound like he should have some value, but back then, we really didn't have broken green cards, right? Compared to what we see today, back then, I mean, you popped a green card and you gained like 20% strike damage versus Frieza Force for 10 counts. Like, that's essentially what the effects were back then. So it didn't really matter how many of those you had in your deck, because it didn't really provide you with a ton of value like they do now. This guy also did, I believe, actually have extra damage to hybrids. So this is the, I have him. I can't like unzenkai him actually, so I don't know if I can actually show this, but I think he had like 30 or 40% damage to hybrids, which, we didn't really have any red hybrid Saiyans in the meta at the time. I think the team that was mostly ran was Purple Super Saiyan 2 Gohan, of course, was the go-to hybrid Saiyan back then. Green Goten, so, I mean, go against the hybrid team, you're just going to get crushed by Goten. Goten literally would kill this guy in 1 strike card. That Green Goten was crazy, the Green Super Saiyan Goten. And then I think the third slot you threw on Green 16 to pair with Purple Gohan, so you really were running 2 greens on hybrids anyway. Right, because what would happen back in the day is you would use Purple Super Saiyan 2 Gohan, you'd sack off Green 16, and that, I think, essentially was the best pairing in the game. And I think that's one of the setups that actually led to sidesteps being nerfed. But yeah, Deborah's extra damage to hybrids didn't particularly make him that threatening. Plus, he had an incredibly weak main ability. I think it just gave him attribute downgrade and abnormal condition immunity 3 times, sort of the God Goku and the OG Red God Goku and Green Beerus effect, which didn't really particularly matter back then because you didn't really have all these abnormal conditions and status effects that you do now. So. Blue Deborah, one of the most nothing releases ever. Just a horrible, horrible design. He's at number 4 here. Let's move on to number 3. Now we're getting into the real characters. Yeah, this guy, Red Pycon. This guy was released in June of 2020, literally right in the middle of the second anniversary. Now, can anyone remember what was happening during the second anniversary? In case you guys weren't playing back then, because at this point, 4.5 years ago, Blue LF Vegito Blue was the headliner for the second anniversary. And he is considered by many to be one of the most oppressive and dominant character releases in the history of this game. A lot of the time, you got touched once by Vegito Blue, and congratulations, you lost a character. Or you could simply just say you lost the match. So, not only that, we also still had Zenkai Final Form Cooler in the game. Definitely not as popular once the anniversary dropped and you had the future team, and GT was sort of a team, but he was still floating around here and there. Zenkai Final Form Cooler with the LOE setup. I think Cooler himself at the times definitely still touted some of the highest damage potential in the game. So, do you think releasing a red ranged character during all of this was a good idea? What do you think? Keep in mind, you literally encountered LF Vegito Blue, I would say 98 out of 100 matches you played, because if you didn't have Vegito or you just didn't run Vegito, you didn't get to play. That's just the way it works, essentially. So this Pycon dropped and immediately just rendered completely worthless, because on top of all of this, there really weren't even any top tier yellows at the time where you would want to take advantage of this character's typing in a matchup against. The only yellow you would occasionally encounter was Yellow Rage Trunks, who was one of the other second anniversary characters, but in a lot of cases, he was able to just straight up tank a lot of Pycon's hits. Type advantage made Pycon do some, I would say, respectable damage to that Rage Trunks, but should have been way better. The single redeeming quality of this guy for me is he was one of actually the first characters. In fact, he might have been the first ever character to have proactive vanish removal, right? When he's transformed and uses green card, he, could gain some value off of it, since he, did he could do okay. Like you green card, remove the enemy's vanish and hit him with a blue card. You could do okay damage with that, but besides that, I mean, where is the value in this character, man? Where is it? This guy's truly one of the worst releases of all time. And this guy, along with the next character on the list, are seen, at least from what I see in the community, as two of the biggest meme releases in the history of Dragon Ball Legends. So Red Pycon number 3. We'll move on to another fan favorite at number 2. All right, here we go. Number 2. We are here with another fan favorite, Blue Boo Tanks. This guy released back in August of 2020. The crazy thing about this guy is, even without any monster green units existing and Zenkai Red Gohan dropping just a week later, this guy dropped and was actually in like a really good spot meta-wise, theoretically, right? You still had characters like Zenkai Beerus, who certainly were still good. Green Zenkai Fappu was still annoying as hell, that's for sure. I'm not denying that. But you would think that with Zenkai Red Gohan around and no really new summonable greens dropping, this guy should have theoretically been in a pretty good spot meta-wise. But somehow, he still managed to be one of the worst releases in the history of the game. Right? So if you just think about what he's doing, unfortunately, I can't show this here just because he's Zenkai and I can't go back. But this guy needed to pop his main ability to get the chunk of his damage active. And his only possible way of getting any kind of damage reduction was also obtained through the main ability. But then both the damage buff and the damage reduction buffs that he got from popping his main were cancelable. They're both cancelable. And then his main damage buff was only for the first 1/3 of the fight. I believe it was for the first 70 counts, something like that. So a little bit over 1/3 of the fight. That's all it lasted for, and then it expired. And then his last damage buff was just straight up cancelable when he got hit by any attack, which includes tap attacks, tackles, and tap blasts. So it was actually feasible, completely possible, to be in a situation where this character on the battlefield getting 0% damage inflicted and 0% reduced damage received as a summonable character over 2 years after the launch of the game. It is actually inconceivable how this made it past the testing phase of their development cycle. I would be aghast if we ever see a character as bad as this guy come out again. There's nothing else I need to say about this character. You guys know how bad he is. I don't need to keep harping on this. Let's move on to the number 1 on the list. Released in December 2018, Green Beerus is going to come in at number 1 on this list as the single worst summonable Sparking on release in Dragon Ball Legends history. Sometimes I come across discussions on social media where people are talking about, the worst characters ever released and stuff like that. And, you usually hear the typical names thrown out like Blue Bootanks, Red Pycon, Transforming Blue Vegeta. Usually it's the standard, list of characters. And I think most people are more familiar with those characters. But I almost never hear this guy brought up. And I think the answer is very obvious as to why. And I think there's 2 reasons. Number 1, this guy released such a long time ago. We're talking 6 months after the game launched. So essentially 6 years ago is when this guy came out. And number 2, he was very, very hard to pull. So if you guys aren't familiar with the history of Green Beerus, this character technically wasn't a Legends Limited character on release. You can see he obviously has the Legends Limited designation right now, but on release, the Legends Limited designation didn't exist 6 years ago. And that designation wasn't added to the game until Super Vegito, Purple Super Vegito, dropped for the 1st anniversary. When Beerus came out, he was actually the first ever ticket exclusive character. And I guess the best way I can explain what that means is, in today's terms, imagine you're summoning on an LF step-up banner, but you can't actually pull the new LF character from the banner with Chrono Crystals. What you would do is you would summon on the banner with Chrono Crystals, where you would have a 0% chance of pulling the new LF character. You would use your summon coins to purchase tickets from the shop, and then only on the ticket banner do you have a chance at pulling the new LF. That's essentially how Beerus, and then Red Gohan after him, were treated as ticket exclusive characters. So let me try and put into words just how bad this character was on release, okay? It's going to be hard to put this into words because it is just very, very bad. Purple Broly, who is considered by many to be the single most overpowered character to ever release in the history of this game, and if not number 1, he's at least in the top 5 bare minimum. Purple Broly would go on to utterly dominate the entire game for months and months, and he released approximately 2 weeks before Green Beerus. And then if we want to go further than that, about 2 to 3 weeks after this Green Beerus dropped, we got Purple Super Saiyan 3 Goku on the first ever Black Friday banner, who was also beyond broken, okay? Green Beerus not only releases one of the hardest characters to pull that we've ever seen in the history of this game, but he's a green support type character during the height of Purple Broly's reign over the game. Not only that, this Beerus has 0, upon release, 0 supporting effects in his entire kit. He has 0 reduced damage received effects. He has 0 damage inflicted from any of his unique abilities. And he also had 0 teams because God Key had not yet been established, because the only God Key characters to exist when this Beerus dropped were himself and the Red God Goku, because he dropped at the same time on the same step-up banner as Beerus. I think what they were trying to go for with this character's kit is they gave him an ability, and we can pull this up here too. I don't know if I can, again, because he's Zenkai'd, but I mean, he still has the same effect here. I think it's the second unique ability. Yeah, it's still the same kind of effect here. He seals enemies' main abilities for 10 counts every time he switched in 3 times. And I guess they thought him preventing Purple Broly from being able to transform with his main ability would have been a good enough effect so that they didn't have to give him anything else in his entire kit. Like, that's literally all he did. This was the first ever character to seal main abilities, and they were probably thinking, that's a pretty unique effect. We don't need to give him anything else. He's just good as it is. But what ended up happening in actuality is, of course, Broly would just simply utterly annihilate this guy with like 2 cards in his base form. So, good luck, Beerus. You prevented Broly from transforming. Now he's just going to kill you in base form. Like, it doesn't make any difference at all. And then he's dead. And then you just transform when the seal expires. So I think I might have mentioned in the beginning of this video that this was the hardest list I've ever had to make in essentially my entire 6.5 years of covering this game on the channel. There's a lot to go through with this list. I typically do just top 10 lists in the current meta environment of like which are the strongest characters, but looking back at the history of this entire game, 6.5 years, every single Sparking character, this was a lot. This was a lot of work for me to do this. And so I'm really not super confident about most placements on this list, but this is really the only position on the list that I am 100% confident on. This is this character. I'm gonna go back to his art because he deserves for me to look him in the eye when I say this. This is the single worst handled release of any character I've ever seen in any game of all time. And it's not even close. Green Beerus truly is the worst summonable Sparking release in the history of Dragon Ball Legends. So with the list out of the way now, I just wanted to provide you all with another list of the characters that I was considering for the top 10 list, but just didn't end up making it in the end. There were very few units that almost made it. Like, I think Green First Form Cell was pretty close. Green Baby Vegeta was pretty close. Yellow Master Roshi was close. Yellow Turles was close. You know, all those guys were competing for spots, I would say, in the lower end of the list, but there were just too many other characters I felt that deserved their spots more than those characters. Like I said in the beginning of the video, I did spend a considerable amount of time looking back at some of my older videos, and also just looking back at some of the social media posts and what people were generally talking about with some of these character releases, to essentially gauge and remind myself of how each of these characters performed back when they first dropped. And that's what I used to sort of create this list of candidate characters you're seeing on the screen right now, to determine if they deserve a spot on the list. But at the end of the day, I did settle on the top 10 list that we talked about a moment ago. So just to recap, here is a quick graphic to illustrate the list that we talked about throughout this video. Just to quickly go through, number 10, we have Purple Super Saiyan 2 Vegeta. Number 9, we have Blue Krillin. Number 8, we have Yellow Saiyan Saga Goku. Number 7, we have Transforming Blue Vegeta. Number 6, we have Green Cooler. Number 5, we have Purple Turles. Number 4, we have Blue Deborah. Number 3, we got Red Pycon. Number 2, we have Blue Bootanks. And then number 1, we have Green Beerus. If you guys have any placements that you disagree with, let me know down below in the comments which placement you disagree with and why you disagree with it. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you all in the next one.